Hello guys, this is your friend Naruto Nexus 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto was kept behind by Team 7 after Bell Test Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Naruto watched in shock and slight hurt that his newly passed team had just walked away, leaving him tied to a wooden stump. Oi! Hurry up and untie me. The blonde-haired boy screamed, his voice reverberated in the distance in hopes that his team would hear him. This had to be some sort of poor-tasting prank, right? Naruto cursed as he struggled against the rope that bound him to the log. He had tried using the rope escape technique to free himself, but he didn't remember it very well, and they weren't taught to untie anything past a Chunin-level rope anyways. He couldn't even create a shadow clone to unfasten him as his hands could barely make it past his midsection before getting blocked by his tight constraints. In the end, the young genin stopped struggling and blankly stared at the floor. Gigi, you liar. Naruto thought to himself in hurt. If there was one thing that he remembered from all of the speeches that the third Hokage gave him, his first team wasn't just a team. It was supposed to be his family. Naruto truly believed what the old man had told him, and it was one of the main driving forces that he had when he became a ninja. He would finally have a family that he could trust wholeheartedly, which wouldn't ignore his very existence when he graduated. Yet the very moment that his team had finished their first exercise together, everything had gone back to the past. Kakashi left without a second thought, while Sakura followed Sasuke to whatever he was going to do. It was like Sasuke and Sakura, who were about to feed him, and Kakashi's speech was all fake, that they would only show such levels of camaraderie during a mission. Naruto sunk into his thoughts, his exhaustion slowly creeping upon him as the hours went by. The fires of hope that he held to his chest that one of his team would realize their mistake and come back to help him slowly dimmed before they flickered out of existence. Why did I think anything would be different? In the end, I should only rely on myself. After Naruto had given up on waiting for someone to come help him, it was like there was an invisible weight lifted from his shoulders. The blonde-haired boy desperately thought of something that could help him, however, his hazy memories of his time at the academy, coupled with his poor ninja skills, vetoed any solution that he could think of. Suddenly, something came to mind. It was a vague description of some of the techniques stored in the scroll of sealing he had read while he was looking for something he could learn. Most of the techniques he saw he couldn't understand, so after a brief skim of their contents and abilities, he moved past them before eventually finding the multiple shadow clone technique. After thinking extremely hard about the scroll of seals and the forbidden techniques stored inside, he thought of one technique he saw inside. The 8 inner gates. Naruto couldn't remember much about the technique, but he was enamored at its description, that it could temporarily increase someone's speed and strength until they surpass the Hokage. The only reason why he didn't attempt to learn this technique was that there was a warning that said the use of said technique could result in death. Yet, in spite of this, Naruto very vaguely remembered how to open the first gate. Even after a week of not thinking about it, the blonde-haired boy remembered that there was a specific point in the left side of the brain which could be opened. If I were stronger, I would be able to just snap the ropes. Naruto thought to himself, ready to attempt to open the first inner gate. Naruto closed his eyes, envisioning the chakra pathway within his body. He could see streams of chakra that circulated through his body alongside several holes. Focusing on the left side of his brain, Naruto noticed something that looked like it should be a hole, but it was closed. This must be the first gate. He couldn't remember much about how to open the gate except that chakra had to be sent to it. Naruto knew he wasn't the brightest student out of everyone at the academy, but he wasn't stupid either. The blonde-haired boy knew that the brain was one of the most sensitive parts of the body, and any mistake could result in him turning into a vegetable. Whatever that was. Hence Naruto focused as hard as he could, sending a small stream of chakra onto the closed point on the left side of the brain. He could faintly feel that he had reached a blockage, and he slowly pushed as little chakra as possible into the gate. After hundreds of attempts of pushing the chakra into the closed gate, Naruto started getting a little impatient. However, the fear of harming himself after making a mistake scared him far more than staying tied to the post for longer. Eventually, Naruto felt a small hole appear at the gate, which he pushed his potent chakra into. Slowly but surely, he sent more and more chakra into the gate, opening it wider and wider. Naruto figured that the absence of pain meant he wasn't doing anything wrong, however, at the same time, he wasn't feeling any more powerful. After what felt like forever, the gate stopped expanding, with Naruto's chakra filling it completely. Opening his eyes, Naruto looked around, confused. Wasn't I supposed to get super strong and break through these restraints? All of a sudden, Naruto felt a surging pain originating from his brain that quickly rushed throughout his body. The young boy opened his mouth to scream, but all that left his mouth was a silent whine as tears started streaming down his face. I knew this wouldn't go right. Why would it? Nothing ever does with me. Ultimately, the pain in his head reached the point where he couldn't handle it anymore, and he fell unconscious. While unconscious, Naruto had a long dream. First memory, age 0. Naruto could hear sounds of destruction resounding from all around, yet he could see nothing but darkness, which scared him. However, he felt a comforting feeling as his whole body was enveloped in warmth as he was swayed from side to side, which made all the fear vanish. All of a sudden, all sounds started to die down as he lost himself in the warm feeling with all noise drifting away. Had he fallen asleep? Naruto didn't know how long he was in this state. Why was he here? Why couldn't he move? He was broken from his thoughts and fears by the warm sound of a young woman whose voice was intermittently cut off with painful groans. Naruto, me, don't be a fussy eater, eat lots and grow healthy and strong. Make sure that you bathe every day and stay warm. Also, don't stay up late, you need lots of sleep, and make friends. You don't need a lot of friends, just a few, ones that you can really trust. I wasn't very good at it, but keep up with your studies and practice your ninjutsu hard. Remember that everyone has strengths and weaknesses, so don't get too depressed if you can't do something well. Respect your teachers and upperclassmen at the academy. Oh, and this is important, it's about the 3 prohibitions for a shinobi. Be extra careful about lending and borrowing money. Put your mission wages into your savings account. No alcohol until you're 20, too much can ruin your health, so drink in moderation. Another prohibition is women. I'm a woman, so I don't know too much about this, but all you need to remember is that the world is made up of men and women. So it's only natural to take an interest in girls. But just don't get hooked on bad women, find someone just like me. Speaking of the 3 prohibitions, be wary of Jiraiya sensei. You know, Naruto, from now on, you're going to face lots of pain and hardship. Be true to yourself, have a dream and have the confidence to make that dream come true. There's so much, so much more that I want to pass on to you. I wish I could stay with you longer, I love you. Naruto was in shock as he listened to the woman's heartfelt words. Who was she, and why was she talking to him like that? He had never met someone that sounded like that in his life, and certainly not someone who cared as much as it seemed like she did. The woman seemed to whisper to someone nearby before a man's voice, just as pained as the woman's, yet just as warm, spoke. I am sorry I won't be there for you as a father, Naruto. Your life is going to be difficult and full of hardships, but I believe in you. Listen to your mother. Between us, she was always the smarter one. Always try to do what you believe is best, and I am sure you will grow into a fine young man I will be proud of. I love you, my son. Involuntarily, Naruto opened his bright blue eyes to see a red-headed woman and a blonde-haired man standing in front of him, being impaled by the claws of the Kyuubi. They seemed to both mutter something before the Kyuubi quickly shrunk before fusing into his body. Mom, Dad, was Naruto's last coherent thought before he lost himself to the tide of memories that overwhelmed him. 4 years later, Konohagakure Orphanage, age 4. Naruto was curled up in his bed. It was what he determined to be his only safe space in this cold, harsh world. The young boy had always wondered why he was treated differently from others. He looked through the window to see multiple children ranging from 3 to 8 years old playing. Yet despite knowing they were having so much fun, he couldn't bring himself to join them, knowing that all he would receive were mean words and cold stares. "Children, come down for your lesson." A voice resounded throughout the orphanage that Naruto recognized to be the matron's. The sounds of playing and laughter died down as the children split into their respective age groups entering different rooms. In the room that Naruto walked in were 7 or 8 other boys and girls who fidgeted while waiting for the caretaker to start teaching. "Today, we are going to learn the alphabet." The caretaker cheered with a happy smile on her face, exciting the children. Naruto also looked forward to learning. He had always wanted to be like those people he saw jumping from roof to roof and had overheard that you needed to read and write to do that. The young blonde-haired boy listened intently as the caretaker passed out a pencil and sheet of paper to each child while explaining today's lesson. However, when the caretaker reached him, she simply passed him without acknowledging his existence. "Miss Caretaker, what about me?" Naruto asked, slightly raising his hand to catch her attention. As if she didn't hear the boy, the caretaker continued to talk about the basics of the alphabet without a pause. Naruto looked down intently at his table as if he felt judging stares from the children around him and didn't bother asking again. So what if he didn't have a pencil and paper? If he put enough effort in, he could learn too, right? 3 years later, Konohagakure Orphanage, age 7. It turns out he was wrong. Even though he paid attention to every word the caretaker said while repeating everything he heard inside his head, he quickly fell behind in his studies. Although the caretakers changed from each year to the next as he moved classrooms, his treatment was the same. He was ignored whenever he asked a question, and he was never handed a pencil or paper. Several weeks later, age 7. Naruto was ecstatic. While he was on one of his regular camping trips to escape the presence of everyone who just looked straight through him at the orphanage, he ran into an old man in the forest. Initially, he had thought that the old man was lost, but it turns out he was the Hokage. Whoever he was the leader of the village. But most importantly, he spoke to him, didn't ignore his very existence with the blank stare that he so often received, but instead had a warm smile. The old man even laughed when talking with him. He could remember what the old man said like it was yesterday. "People don't like you, you say. Well, why don't you become a ninja? They are loved and respected by virtually everybody in the village as they are our protectors." Naruto was surprised when he had heard this. If he became a ninja, people would like him. The blonde-haired boy was undoubtedly even more surprised to find out that the ninja that the old man talked about were those cool people who jumped from roof to roof. "Really? I wanna become a ninja then." Naruto cheered before slumping. "But how do I become a ninja? I don't know if anybody would teach me." The old man looked thoughtful. "Well, I could use my power to enroll you as a student at the academy. However, you must train really hard to become a ninja." "I'll do it. I will try my best, and maybe I will become Hokage like you one day." "I would love to see that day, Naruto-kun." 2 years later, Konoha Ninja Academy, age 9. Naruto looked at the barely passing grade marked on his exam paper. It turned out that becoming a ninja was much harder than he thought. The young child remembered his first couple of days at the academy, trying his best to make a good impression on the teachers. But it seemed like they knew the people from the orphanage because they treated him in almost the exact same way. Thankfully, they weren't completely the same, as these teachers had given him books just like everybody else. But that was the extent of their help. Whenever he raised his hand to ask a question, it would always stay in the air until his arm got tired. Every test or assignment handed back only contained the overall marks, unlike other students who received detailed corrections on their mistakes. In the end, Naruto decided that he would impress them by studying hard and becoming the top student in the class. They couldn't ignore him if he was the number one student, right? Naruto soon found out that becoming the number one student without any helpful guidance was near impossible. It didn't help that the books he was given contained many words that he hadn't learned or couldn't remember from learning the basics at the orphanage. He was slowly learning the words he missed out or had forgotten with the help of a discarded book that he found in the trash. But as a result, he was spending less time on his ninja studies and fell even further behind. At least I am not the worst student in the class, Naruto thought to himself in a vain attempt to muster some form of pride. Yet as he looked toward the student who scored the lowest marks, he could only feel envy. Even though that student received the worst grade in the class, he didn't seem to care. In fact, he was happily chatting with his friends, seemingly without a care in the world. Friends. It had been a while since he had attempted to make friends since everyone at the orphanage ignored him. He didn't even try to talk to anyone when he first arrived at class because he was scared he would receive the same treatment. However, they seemed like friendly people. And since there was no point in studying anymore, as he learned that high grades didn't exactly equal many friends. They seem like nice people, Naruto thought, blankly watching the interactions between everyone in the class. There's no point in studying if I am so far behind. It's not like high grades equal many friends anyways. Naruto glanced toward the class's top student, who blankly stared out the window, ignoring everybody else. Sasuke Uchiha, the blonde-haired boy, didn't know why Sasuke was like that, but he was slightly envious of the treatment the boy received from others in the class. Even though the boy ignored everyone around him, he still had people surrounding him. The blonde-haired girl, Ino Yamanaka, and the pink-haired girl, Sakura Haruno, both seemed to gravitate towards the boy. Maybe I should try making some friends, Naruto thought. Hopefully, it would make that weird feeling he felt when he saw other people talk and smile at each other go away. 2 years later, age 11. It turns out that making friends is even harder than studying. Naruto reflected on his efforts over the past 2 years while ignoring the ongoing lecture. He had been in this class for a little over 4 years, but he had yet to make a single friend. Of course, not without trying, but everyone seemed to have an excuse for why they couldn't be friends. The first person he attempted to befriend was a young boy called Shino Abarum because he was quiet like him. Yet even after he spent the effort to learn about the boy's favorite topic, insects. One day, the boy mentioned that his Kikaichu felt uncomfortable in his presence and that they couldn't be friends. Naruto snorted, remembering that, if he hadn't wanted to be around him, he should have just said so. There was no need to lie to him about it. Naruto had also attempted to befriend the others in the class but was met with varying obstacles or straight-out refusals. A young girl called Hinata Hyuga would always faint when he tried talking to her. He wasn't that scary, right? At one point, Naruto had thought he had made success when he managed to hang out with Shikamaru Nara, Choji Akamichi and Kiba Inuzuka, with them all going to the park to watch clouds or play on the swings. Yet after goofing off with them a few times, they also seemed to stop wanting to hang out with him. After the first year of trying to make friends through various methods, whether it was learning about what they were interested in, only doing what they wanted to do, or even giving gifts, Naruto shifted his goals to another event. His birthday was coming up, and he had overheard that people made friends at birthday parties. Thankfully, the old man had given him his own apartment a few years back when he had inadvertently complained that he was being ignored by his caretakers. Maybe he could host a party, and if everyone had fun, they would be able to hang out more. Naruto spent the rest of his time before the birthday party saving up money, to the point of not even visiting Ramen Ichiraku. He had done his best to make handwritten invitations to everyone in his class, triple checking to ensure that he had spelt their names correctly before putting them under their desks. Nobody said anything in class on the day of his birthday. It was like they hadn't received the letters at all. Maybe they are shy, Naruto thought to himself. He could understand since he didn't even have the courage to invite them in person and could only send letters. The young boy started hyping himself up. Everyone was going to come, and he would make so many friends that he wouldn't feel lonely anymore. Sloppily made banners decorated the apartment, which made the somewhat gloomy apartment look much nicer. After placing the food on any surface he could see, Naruto sat and waited for his first guest to arrive. Yet after a few hours of waiting after the time specified on the invitations, nobody had turned up. Naruto looked at the birthday cake that sat in front of him. Maybe they are running late, the young boy said hopefully to himself. However, as the hours went by and the food cooled, Naruto started to feel like nobody was planning on coming despite his endless optimism. Did I do something wrong? Why didn't they just tell me if they couldn't come? He was a big boy now. He could take rejection, especially after being rejected so many times, a small bitter part of himself added. In the end, Naruto silently ate the cake alone. Nobody was coming to his birthday. Maybe they weren't interested because it wasn't good enough. Thinking that had hurt, but it was much better than accepting that nobody liked him. I'll try harder next year. The blonde-haired boy resolved to get at least one person to attend his party next year. For the next year, Naruto spent most of his time saving money. Occasionally, he would hunt a hare or boar in the forest and sell it to a traveling merchant to make some extra money. The day before his 11th birthday, he again sent out invitations to everyone by hiding them in their desks. He bought a bigger cake, even more food and better decorations, which were all neatly set out on the day. Yet history repeated itself once more. Even after the increased effort he put in, nobody came even hours after the invitation time. Naruto didn't want to spend his birthday alone again, so he decided to just visit the festival. To avoid the cold glares and whispers that seemed to follow him, Naruto covered himself up until he was unrecognizable. It was October anyways, and most people covered up at this time of year. However, after walking around for 5 minutes, Naruto wished he had never left the house. He found out the reason why nobody came to his birthday party. He could see Sakura and Ino hanging out at one of the stalls while Shikamaru and Choji were eating at another. Naruto even saw Hinata walking alongside a taller man and a young girl that looked similar to her. Naruto had never felt so distraught in his life, not even when he was ignored by the people at the orphanage. Of course, they didn't attend his parties because they didn't want to. What other reasons could there possibly be? They were busy. The young boy never thought he was demanding. All he wanted was for someone to look at him just like old man Hokage did whenever he visited. Oi, get back here. Naruto turned to where the voice was coming from and watched as a young child was running from what he assumed were his family or friends, judging by the smiles on their faces. One thing that confused him was the fact that those chasing the boy were covered in a mixture of blue, red and green paint. You can't catch me. It was your fault for walking into my trap, giggled the young boy as he fled into the crowd. In spite of his sadness, Naruto let a small smile slip past. The young boy threw a paint bomb at them. That sounded pretty funny. Suddenly, a flash of inspiration hit him. Prank. Naruto saw how much attention the boys had when running through the crowd. Even he, who wasn't in a very good mood, turned his head to look, his eyes glued to them. If I pranked others, will people look at me too? Naruto didn't care if they sent looks of amusement, cold glares or even hateful ones. As long as at least someone glanced his way, he was happy. The young boy looked at the street stalls, picking up a bucket of paint with the remainders of his money. He had enough food to last at least a week anyway. 1 year later, age 12. Naruto smiled at his latest prank that had shocked everybody. It was the first time anybody had even considered vandalizing the Hokage monument, so it was never guarded. It served them right. Naruto Uzumaki did what he wanted when he wanted. Get back here, Naruto. Several civilians and low-ranking ninjas screamed as they formed a small mob, chasing him. Naruto smiled in glee. It felt great. People actually called him by name instead of boy or you. He had even heard someone call him Fox Brat for some reason. He tucked that thought away, assuming it was because of the whisker marks on his face. Naruto remembered back to the first prank he pulled. It was on one of the teachers that had been mean to him throughout the years. It was a small prank in which he added a fresh layer of paint to the teacher's chair and desk, which quickly coated the teacher's clothes as he sat down. Eventually, the teacher signaled out that it was him, which he unabashedly admitted. Naruto subtly scanned students' reactions in the class. Some looked annoyed, while some were smiling. However, one girl, who he remembered to be Sakura Haruno, flashed a brief smile in his direction before covering her mouth. It made him feel warm and fuzzy, and he really wanted that feeling to continue. At that moment, Naruto decided that he liked the pink-haired girl and wanted to be friends with her, even though he had failed before. Even after being shot down several times asking the girl for a date, Naruto desperately sought that feeling again. So he upped the levels of his pranks, which were slowly becoming more and more elaborate in hopes for her to smile at him once more. Initially, he targeted everyone who was mean to him over the years, but eventually, it escalated into pranking several important parts of the village. Several days later, age 12, Naruto stood in a clearing as he held the scroll of sealing which Mizuki-sensei told him to steal as an additional graduation test after he had failed the regular one. The blonde-haired boy scanned through the techniques on the scroll. Flying Thunder God Jutsu Shiki and Space-Time Ninjutsu concepts. The 8 Inner Gates. Living Corpse Reincarnation. Eventually, he reached a technique called the Multiple Shadow Clone Technique. Iruka-sensei mentioned that he had failed due to not being able to create a clone. So maybe if he learned how to do a clone technique even after passing the hidden graduation test, he might be promoted to a higher rank. A Super Genin. An Elite Genin. The subsequent events seemed to blur together as Naruto slowly came to himself in the long dream he was having. You are the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Mizuki screamed at him, who was guarded by a bleeding Iruka. He isn't the demon fox. He is Naruto Uzumaki. Well done. Naruto, close your eyes. Those in the ninja world who break the rules are scum, that's true, but those who abandon their friends are lower than scum. Why did they leave me? Dream over. After experiencing the last of the dream, Naruto awoke in a cold sweat. Was it a dream? It had to have been one. However, despite telling himself that, Naruto knew it wasn't true. Those were his memories, being far clearer than they had ever been before. So I am the son of that red-headed woman and the Yondaime Hokage, Minato Namikaze. Naruto blankly stared ahead before bitterly laughing. Ha ha ha, how ridiculous. There's no way. Yet the image of Minato and the red-headed woman looking at him with nothing but love in their eyes as they whispered their last words was permanently ingrained in his mind. There's no way. Why? Naruto's tears rolled down his face. Why did they choose him? Why did they die? Why did they leave him all alone? Naruto wanted to hate them for taking away his fantasies that his parents were still alive out there somewhere, not knowing that he was suffering in Konoha. That they were looking for him and missed him just as much as he missed them. However, he couldn't. Going through his memories, he understood what he wasn't able to understand when he was moments after being born. He could hear and feel the love that they had for him. That they didn't want to leave him alone. That they didn't want to subject him to this life. I'll make them proud. If you are looking over me, I will become so strong that you will never have to worry about me ever again. That's a promise. Naruto screamed to the skies, hoping his voice would somehow be transmitted to his parents in the afterlife. The blonde-haired boy rubbed his face into his orange jacket, wiping the tears from his face. After calming down, he looked down at the rope, tying him to the log. After waking up, he remembered everything he had experienced in his life, including every word of the 8 Inner Gates technique. He didn't use the wrong tenketsu, the first gate, the gate of opening, was located in the left part of his brain. However, instead of slowly opening the gate and saturating it with his chakra, he was supposed to violently force his chakra through the gate, resulting in a temporary increase in strength and speed. Naruto closed his eyes and checked the status of the first gate. It was still open, and there was no strain on his body at all. It was weird because he was out for what was most likely several hours, as denoted by the darkness that surrounded him. Yet the scroll of sealing stated that opening the gate, even the very first gate, was supposed to cause tremendous strain on the body. Even more so for someone like him who had just graduated from the academy. And yet, he felt fine. Even better than fine. Did it have something to do with the way he opened the gate? The fact that he was the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune? Or maybe even the fact that he could have developed a bloodline that affected his body? After his stomach groaned once more, Naruto decided that he would figure out the reasoning behind the changes he was currently experiencing later. All he wanted to do was escape from the ropes, eat and sleep. Think, Naruto, think. What could I possibly do to escape? Suddenly, a flash of inspiration came to mind. It was a lesson that a Jonin volunteered to do a few years ago because his class was full of clan heirs and was expected to be the backbone of Konoha in the future. One-handed hand seals. At the time, he couldn't understand it, and it wasn't an interesting lecture by any means. However, Naruto did his absolute best to pay attention to every word said and every action the Jonin performed. This was one of the top ninjas of the village. Even if it wasn't useful to him back then, it might come in handy in the future. The multiple shadow clone technique uses a clone seal. Therefore the one-handed version should be this. Naruto struggled to move his right hand into the correct seal. Even though he had seen it before and remembered it with perfect clarity, he had never once attempted to use it. Hence, his fingers were trembling slightly, unused to the new yet awkward movement they were subjected to. Naruto expelled a relatively large burst of chakra before a dead clone-like thing poofed into existence for a moment before disappearing. Arg, come on. The trapped genin screamed in pure rage. He had to deal with making dead clones for years. He didn't want to experience it again. After taking several deep breaths to calm himself, Naruto focused on his right hand as he subtly moved his fingers into a more standard shape. There was no reason why he would get this right on the first try. Even learning the multiple shadow clone technique took over an hour to learn. Poof, a dead clone appeared. Poof, a dead clone was expelled. It didn't take long for Naruto's one-handed clone sign to become more and more natural. The clones also started to look closer and closer to a normal shadow clone. Suddenly, an exact replica of Naruto appeared in front of him. The clone seemed to know what its purpose was as he stuffed his hands into Naruto's ninja pouch, pulling out a slightly blunted kunai before sawing at the ropes tying the boy. Thanks. Naruto thanked himself. That was weird. But the clone merely gave a grin, no problem, boss, and dispelled himself. Suddenly, Naruto was hit with a slight influx of memories. He remembered seeing himself tied to the post, rummaging through his own pockets to retrieve a kunai before setting himself free. I can get the memories of my own clones. Naruto asked aloud to himself in confusion. He never noticed it before, which wasn't surprising considering all the times he had used them were in fights. Naruto focused, trying to remember the description of the multiple shadow clone technique stored within the scroll of sealing. Multiple shadow clone, A-rank supplementary technique. This technique allows the user to create a large number of copies of themselves. The user's chakra is evenly divided between themselves and their clones. See shadow clone technique for dangers and additional side effects. No wonder I didn't pick up on such an awesome tip earlier. Naruto scratched the back of his head in wonder. The standard shadow clone technique wasn't found within the scroll of sealing. Or maybe it was, but not in the first 3 techniques that he had read when looking for a cool technique in the scroll. Just as Naruto was about to think of all the potential applications of the shadow clone technique, a sudden wave of tiredness hit him. He was low on chakra, hadn't eaten in almost a day, and hadn't slept in nearly 20 hours. Hence the young genin discarded all remaining thoughts and returned home. Thankfully, Kakashi, the lazy jonin, stated that missions wouldn't start for another day, giving him time to figure out things tomorrow. Contrary to Naruto's earth-shattering revelations yesterday, he experienced the best night of sleep that he had ever had in his whole life. Releasing a small yawn, the blonde rubbed his eyes as he sat up in his bed, contemplating yesterday's events. Now that his emotions had settled down, he wondered what he should do. Naruto desperately wanted to run to the Hokage and scream at him, demanding why the old man kept saying that he didn't know his parents when he clearly did. He saw the old man pick him up shortly after his parents sealed the Kyuubi into him. There was no way he didn't know. However, what good would it do? The Hokage questioning him about where he learned that information. Him denying it to the very end that he didn't know his parents. The slight satisfaction he might get after hearing it from the old man's mouth. In the end, Naruto now knew who his father was, and he had enough information to figure out who his mother was. He knew what they looked like, but most importantly, he knew that they loved him. Yet the years of lies that the Hokage spewed left a bitter feeling in his heart. He didn't know who his parents were. He didn't know why the villagers hated him. Naruto didn't know if the Hokage would have told him about the Kyuubi being sealed in him unless he was forced to, like Mizuki inadvertently forced him to. The blonde-haired boy also wanted to talk to someone about what he was feeling, but who could he tell? The Hokage had lied to him practically throughout the duration that he had known him. Certainly not his team, that had abandoned him tied to the log not even a day after becoming a team. His non-existent friends. Naruto had even considered telling the Ichiraku duo Tsuki and Ayame. He had known them for several years after they had been kind enough to feed him when he had no money. They were some of the kindest people he knew as they hadn't ignored him due to the Kyuubi. However, they were civilians. Naruto didn't want to burden them with something that could easily get them killed if others found out. In the end, Naruto kept it all to himself. He has handled everything alone ever since he was born. He didn't need to share his problems with others. He knew his parents loved him, that was enough for him. Naruto then thought about the following problem, the 8 inner gates. Closing his eyes, he could still see that the first gate was open, yet he felt no strain. The only thing that had happened after fully opening the first gate was remembering every detail he had experienced in his life. Maybe that was what opening the gate did. The brain did contain memories, so opening the gate allowed full access to the memories. It was different from the massive increase in strength and speed described by the scroll of sealing, but when has anything ever been normal for him? Naruto tried to create an explanation to satisfy him. Yet, he didn't know enough about the 8 inner gates to draw any conclusions. All he knew was that they were actually tenketsu that were usually closed, contrary to the other tenketsu, which are always open. After scratching his head in confusion, Naruto put the problem behind him. Or at least until he had learned enough about the brain, chakra pathway, tenketsu and the gates before studying further. If he had accidentally discovered a new way of opening the gates like Naruto assumed he did, then he would continue to develop the technique into a unique version that only he knows. Maybe opening each gate would provide him with a special ability or a boost without adding any additional strain on his body. It would be much better than any fancy schmancy temporary boost that wasn't his own strength and might harm him in the long run. Naruto shook his head and snapped out of his fantasies. There was no use daydreaming about what the technique he inadvertently stumbled upon could do, he should focus on the present. Hence he thought about the next problem he had to solve, the multiple shadow clone technique. There were many things about the technique that he didn't know because they weren't written in the scroll of sealing. The only things that Naruto knew about the technique were that they formed solid clones and they would pass on every memory experienced in its lifetime, when it was dispelled. As a result of the lack of information, Naruto did something he hadn't done for several years. He took notes. How many clones can I make? How much damage can they take before being dispelled? How many memories get transferred back to me? What happens if I dispel a clone with another in existence? Do we both get memories? If a clone does physical training, do I get stronger? Is everything on me cloned, including weapons? If so, are the cloned weapons as weak as the main body? After finishing writing every single application of the shadow clone technique that he could think of, Naruto made a clone sign and willed 4 clones into existence. I want you to read this book. Naruto handed a book from the academy that he hadn't touched, while making a mental note to return it before the end of the week. The clone started grumbling but took the book and went off to read in the corner. Naruto then hastily scribbled something on a piece of paper before handing it to another clone, away from the eyes of the other 2. After ensuring the clone had read it, he dispelled it and looked toward the other 2 clones. You really need to get better handwriting, boss. One of the clones muttered while rolling his before announcing, "My name is Naruto Uzumaki, and I like ramen." So it seems like the memories are transmitted to all clones. Naruto pondered out loud before his thoughts were rudely interrupted by himself. I bet even someone who isn't a clone would be able to guess that was what you had written. A clone snarked before suddenly being violently dispelled. Cling a kunai dropped to the floor in its wake. Naruto gave an evil glare to the other clone, daring it to say something. Hey, I like ramen as much as you do, boss. The clone rapidly shook his head, not wanting to be dispelled like that too. Would ever just pass me one of your kunai and start working out, Naruto grumbled, extending his hand. Faster than anything he had seen before, Naruto watched the clone quickly pull out a kunai from his pouch before leaving the room to exercise. While waiting for the clone to exhaust itself, Naruto looked closely at the kunai, comparing it to his own. It was an exact replica, whether it was size, shape, weight, hardness or sharpness. Throwing the clone kunai at the wall didn't cause the kunai to dispel, which was strange since the shadow clone just now had dispelled with a small nick to the leg. Maybe non-living objects retain their properties. If that's the case, then if the object takes any form of damage, it should dispel. Naruto muttered, taking one of his kunai and went to work making a scratch on the cloned one. Sure enough, after 10 seconds of sawing, the clone kunai disappeared in a puff of smoke. So to keep my clones around for longer, I need to reduce the damage that they take. Naruto's muttering filled the apartment as he added each conclusion drawn to his notes. An hour later, Naruto dispelled the remaining clones, feeling a large bout of exhaustion alongside the knowledge of the academy book stuffed into his head. He summarized all of the results from the experiments and wrote them on a single sheet of paper. I can make at least 1,000 clones, as shown in the fight against Mizuki. The clones aren't very durable, and any scratch will dispel them. When the clones dispel, they transmit all memories to himself and any existing clones. The cloned weapons have the same durability as standard weapons but dispel when they run out of chakra to maintain their form. Clones do not transfer any physical training. However, they do transfer the exhaustion from doing so. The clones also seem to have varying personalities, although they generally act the same as me. With all of the mysteries of shadow clones solved, Naruto sat down and thought about his future plan of action. He made a promise that he would become the strongest ninja to ever exist for his parents, and Naruto Uzumaki doesn't break a promise. His first idea before he started training was to get an honest evaluation of his skills, but he didn't know anybody that would help him in that regard. Therefore he just wrote a list of what he knew he could do. Ninjutsu. Multiple shadow clone, henge, kawarimi. Genjutsu. Can't perform any, but can dispel jutsu below D rank. Taijutsu. Only learnt the basics of the academy style but doesn't feel comfortable. Shurikenjutsu. Hit a non-moving target 5 out of 10 times 10 meters away using kunai and shuriken. Stealth. Can avoid several chunin after painting the Hokage monument. Speed, strength. Can run away from chunin. Dunno about strength. Hand seals. Can make 2 standard hand seals a second and I only know how to do a single one-handed seal. Naruto looked at the relatively short, vague list and sighed. There was a lot of work to do to become stronger. Well, I ain't gonna get stronger just by sitting around. Naruto hyped himself up, ready to leave through the door to do what? What could he do to train himself? Naruto's hand hovered over the door handle. The only thing he knew about training as a genin was that he was supposed to be trained by his Jonin sensei. Were there no other options but to go ask for help? Even though he had only just decided that he could be strong alone. The Shinobi Library. Naruto shouted in exclamation, remembering one of the places he wanted to visit a few years ago. A few years ago, when he was trying to get ahead of his classmates in their ninja studies, Naruto was attempting all sorts of methods to progress his learning. However, with the limited materials he had access to, his learning speed was much slower than his peers. At one point, he had wanted to access the Konoha library to read different books in hopes of finding a different explanation to help him understand the content of the lectures. But he was barred because he wasn't a genin yet, and nobody below the ranks of genin was allowed into the library. The ever so curious Naruto had ended up asking about the protocols of the library if only to sat his curiosity. There were several rules for the library that made it both fair and unfair to aspiring ninjas. The first rule was that to view ninjutsu and genjutsu, you had to pay based on the technique's rank. Only B-rank techniques and below are sold, while A-rank techniques and above are either self-created, taught by Jonin, or allowed to read upon entry to Anbu. Taijutsu and Bukijutsu were exempt from this rule because learning a style took a long time, and there wasn't any specific style that was overwhelmingly stronger than any others. The second rule was that all resources such as chakra control and nature transformation exercises were only available for genin-ranked ninja and above. In Naruto's opinion, this rule was the most unfair one, as clan ninjas had a great advantage as they were taught the more advanced exercises and techniques at home, unlike civilians who had to make genin before they could read scrolls. The third and most important rule was that any damage to the library would be met with a hefty fine and a temporary permanent ban from the premises depending on the damage caused. After recalling the rules and regulations, Naruto reached for the money pouch on his waist, examining the contents. There were very few times he wished he didn't spend all of his money on ramen, and this was one of those times as he looked at his almost empty pouch. However, that feeling was quickly squashed by the thought that he needed to focus on the basics first. Iruka-sensei always reprimanded him, saying that his chakra control was terrible or that his taijutsu, shurikenjutsu, sucked. So Naruto figured that he should first fill in the gaps in his knowledge due to skipping the academy over the past year. While also learning everything he had failed to understand at the academy before thinking about what cool ninjutsu he should learn. With his goal decided, Naruto opened the door, relying on his memories to find the shinobi library. It didn't take long before Naruto could be spotted standing outside the Konoha library. It was a large, pink stone building with mahogany brown planks decorating its outskirts. Yet despite being a relatively important building in Konoha, the blonde-haired boy noted it was fairly deserted. Naruto hoped he wouldn't be barred from entering due to his past pranking habits. After all, it was one of the few places that he refused to prank in respect for the librarian that didn't hold any prejudice. Or maybe she did, but just hid it well. A pessimistic part of Naruto thought. After opening the front door, Naruto scratched his head in confusion after finding that the inside of the library was practically devoid of people. Surely a place that is as useful as the library wouldn't be this empty. Maybe I am here too early. What Naruto didn't know was that the library was rarely visited by shinobi unless they received a D-rank mission to clean it. This was because all taijutsu, kenjutsu and even ninjutsu and genjutsu are usually taught by their superiors. They would only visit the library to purchase a jutsu that they wanted to learn, but nobody knew, or if they wanted to brush up on their geographical knowledge. Hello, receptionist lady. I would like to visit the shinobi section. Naruto walked over to the half-asleep receptionist, waking the woman from her stupor. Ah, you're the Uzumaki kid. The receptionist tapered off, earning a sheepish look from the boy. She was reluctant to let him in as she would be held jointly responsible for any damage done to the library. However, rules were rules, and any shinobi were allowed to enter, provided they weren't banned. Naruto looked curiously at the receptionist while she was having internal struggles about letting him but smiled as she sighed, her shoulders dropping all tension. Just don't damage anything, the receptionist commanded, shooing the boy away while watching him like a hawk. She didn't have anything against the boy, but the boy's love for pranks, even if they were sometimes funny, made her a little wary about what his goal was in visiting the library. Her worries were quelled as she saw Naruto pick up a book on the basics of shinobi arts before sitting by a table in the corner. She continued watching him for the better part of an hour, waiting for him to slip up, but all she could see was him silently reading. Eventually, she decided that the boy could be trusted. It wasn't like she could spend all day watching him, so the receptionist returned to what she was doing before he arrived. Dozing off. Naruto finally felt the gaze on his back disappear, allowing him to immerse himself in the book. He wasn't often stared at, especially with such an intent gaze that drilled into the back of his head, so he initially felt a little awkward. But the awkwardness soon faded as he continued to read the book's contents. It didn't take long before he was able to make his way through the book. As he gently closed the book, Naruto thought back to the contents of the book before coming to a startling realization. He could remember every word of every line of every page in the book. He could remember everything. Naruto took a small slip of paper and wrote the contents of page 48 before comparing what he had written to the text in the book. It was exactly the same. The blonde-haired boy continued to test himself with random lines in the book, with him having a 100% success rate in recalling what he had read. Naruto knew that he had never had this ability before. Otherwise, even with the subtle sabotage he received at the orphanage and the academy, he wouldn't have fallen behind at all. He recalled that this all started after opening the first inner gate, the gate of opening. What if opening the first gate didn't grant access to every memory, but instead caused a change in my brain to give me the ability to remember everything I see? It made sense after thinking about it. Naruto had found it strange that the clone had managed to memorize everything in the book it was given so quickly. But he ended up figuring that it had something to do with the nuances of shadow clones. However, this was completely different. It wouldn't take long for him to catch up and even surpass everyone in his graduation class with this new ability, especially with the help of shadow clones, which made it as if he was reading 10 or even 100 times at once. Naruto took a deep breath to calm himself before he got too ahead of himself. There were still things about the shadow clone technique that he was wary about. After dispelling the 2 clones that were reading and training, he did feel a significant amount of exhaustion and slight pain from the sudden memory influx. He didn't want to find out what would happen to this slight pain if there were 10, 5 or even only 3 clones reading simultaneously. He might even feel the same sharp pains he experienced when initially opening the first inner gate. The blonde was sure that he was walking on thin ice at the library. With his past penchant for pranks, he knew he would immediately be kicked out if he made noise, even from screaming in pain. Hence Naruto decided to tone down the plan to summon 10 shadow clones and only conjured a single clone. If he discovered that he could handle the strain from more than 1 clone reading, he would assign more to read in the future. Clone Naruto walked over to a nearby bookshelf, picking up a book about nature transformation before an idea came to his mind. Henge no Jutsu, the clone transformed itself into an ordinary genin before sitting at a table out of the receptionist's view. Naruto's eyes brightened, and he nodded in admiration at the smart idea. He truly was a genius. If others came in, seeing 2 Narutos reading, they might get suspicious about his use of clones. The henge would prevent anybody from walking in and seeing the 2 Narutos reading, while hiding in the receptionist's blind spot would prevent her from calling out YA, Genin entered without signing in. After learning that the person he considered closest to him, the Hokage, had lied about the two biggest problems that plagued his existence alongside remembering clearly how everyone he knew had treated him, had made Naruto not know who to trust. As a result, he would rather keep his training a secret for as long as possible. After both Narutos settled down, they began to read in earnest, flipping through the pages much faster after discovering his now perfect memory. True to its name, his memory was truly perfect. It didn't matter if he was reading at speeds that most humans, even shinobi, couldn't accomplish, he was still memorizing every word. Yet, despite only focusing on memorizing, Naruto was instinctively breaking down every sentence he read into the basics. This wasn't just rote memorization and recalling facts, but he was actually learning as he was reading. That's strange. If my increase in memory can be attributed to the first gate, what could my increase in understanding be related to? Naruto thought to himself. Initially, he put it down as his sudden enthusiasm for learning had bolstered his learning rate. Or the book he was reading explained it in a way that was easy for him to understand. Yet even after changing books, Naruto still felt the same way. In the end, Naruto shook his head and continued to read. The sudden increase in comprehension and understanding wasn't a problem that needed figuring out. He didn't need to overthink every small thing that happened. Since the learning increase happened around the same time as his changes in memory, then he would just chalk it up to being a result of opening the first inner gate. For the next few hours, Naruto could be seen in the corner reading books. After every hour, he would swap the book for a different one on the same subject. He learned more than in 1 month of studying at the academy for every hour spent reading. So it turns out that the shinobi arts are divided into ninjutsu, genjutsu, taijutsu, with there being many sub-techniques such as bukijutsu, fuinjutsu and juinjutsu. There are even some techniques such as senjutsu and space-time ninjutsu. Space-time ninjutsu, isn't that one of the techniques I found in the scroll of sealing? The Hiraishin, Naruto muttered aloud to himself, breaking his gaze free from the book. He took a quick look around in the library, finding several books on space-time ninjutsu. However, they were closer to random creator notes, alongside calculations and formulas that would make anyone dizzy looking at them. One word that caught his attention on one of the space-time ninjutsu notes was fuinjutsu, which was hastily scribbled on the page. Curious about how fuinjutsu was linked to space-time ninjutsu, Naruto looked around until he found an introductory book on fuinjutsu. Fuinjutsu is a type of technique whose entire purpose is to seal. Whether objects, living creatures or chakra, everything can be sealed with fuinjutsu. Naruto's gaze stopped partway through the book despite finding the book an interesting read. The Uzumaki clan, which hailed from Uzushiogakure in the land of whirlpools, were fuinjutsu specialists. Uzumaki clan. I have a clan. Did they know about me? Naruto gasped in shock and happiness, quickly searching the library for every scroll they had on the Uzumaki clan. Yet after he started reading the very few scrolls stored in the library, Naruto's happiness turned into horror. Every scroll stated that Uzushiogakure was destroyed in the Second Shinobi World War due to fear of their fuinjutsu. As a result, the Uzumaki clan had practically gone extinct, with very few sightings of an Uzumaki in the elemental nations. Naruto looked distraught at the only chance of him having a living family was ruthlessly quashed by the past actions of shinobi. In spite of this, he continued to look up information on the Uzumaki clan. He wanted to know what they were like and if his mother was an Uzumaki or not. The Uzumaki clan shared distant blood relations with the Senju clan. Following the founding of Konohagakure, the Senju chose to symbolize their clan's friendship by adding the Uzumaki's own emblem to Konoha shinobi's flak jackets. Uzumakis are known for their red hair and incredibly strong life forces, with them having very long lifespans and aging slower than the average human. They were known to be highly proficient in Kenjutsu and were considered to be the most advanced Fuinjutsu users across the elemental nations. It has also been documented that some Uzumakis have very rare Kekkei Genkei. However, it hasn't been confirmed what type of Kekkei Genkei and what their abilities were. Red hair. So my mother was an Uzumaki. Naruto muttered to himself, finding himself one step closer to learning who his mother was. He hoped he could find her in the shinobi records as he hadn't seen any red-haired people, and nobody in Konoha has the same last name as him, so there is no doubt that she should be easy to find. After reading more about his clan and their exploits, Naruto was shaking with a mixture of emotions. As selfish as it was, he was less sad that his clan had been destroyed as he didn't personally know them, and more upset at the fact that it crushed his last hope that he might have some distant family members alive. However, the fact that the Uzumakis were feared across the elemental nations due to their techniques was something he was in awe of. Kenjutsu and Fuinjutsu, huh? Naruto muttered to himself. He wasn't planning on learning the two ninja arts just because his clan was said to have been experts in them, but instead because of how powerful they were portrayed to be. If a nation was destroyed in fear of their prowess, they had to be highly useful techniques. Before reading the Uzumaki clan's accomplishments, Naruto was one of the people who initially overlooked the usefulness of weapons. Instead, he was obsessed with different ninjutsu and its various elements because it is cooler. As a result, he had never considered adding them to his repertoire before but did agree that they would be useful for when taijutsu couldn't be used. Meanwhile, Fuinjutsu was a far more complex topic. While Naruto felt the need to learn it because of him being living proof of how powerful it is, with it sealing the Kyuubi inside of him, he wasn't anywhere near close enough to start learning it. Naruto read the introduction to the basics of Fuinjutsu. The book stated that having high accomplishments in mathematical knowledge, calligraphy skills, chakra control, jutsu shiki, and fuin shiki, alongside having one nature transformation under your belt, was mandatory before learning Fuinjutsu. After comparing the extensive list of prerequisite skills to his current skills list, Naruto sighed. His handwriting was horrible, with him never needing to practice it as nobody had complained before. Mathematical knowledge, nature transformations, chakra control, jutsu shiki and fuin shiki knowledge were practically non-existent. Except for some basic mathematics and chakra control, none of the topics were approached at the academy. However, even without learning Fuinjutsu, except for calligraphy skills, jutsu shiki and fuin shiki, everything else were topics he was planning on learning anyways. Naruto figured that once he finally mastered, or at least reached a high proficiency in those subjects, he would consider touching Fuinjutsu if he showed enough talent and interest in it. After writing down everything he needed to learn, Naruto put the books on space-time ninjutsu, Fuinjutsu and the Uzumaki clan back on their respective shelves before picking up a book on chakra control. The book contained 4 basic chakra control exercises: leaf sticking, tree walking, water walking and senbon spinning. The author also provided several detailed tips on how to accomplish each activity, alongside the advantages of having high chakra control. So the reason why I can't do the clone technique is because of my poor chakra control, resulting in me using too little or too much chakra. Why didn't anybody tell me before? Naruto was almost pulling his hair out in annoyance. Even when he was paying attention to what Iruka-sensei was teaching when the clone technique was brought up, he only received feedback such as, "Try harder next time, Naruto. You are using too little, much chakra." Sure, he could give Iruka-sensei the benefit of the doubt that the man had only been transferred to the ninja studies from history studies in the past year and hadn't had a chance to get a closer look at his problems. But only being told the problem and not the solution was starting to get tiring. Naruto continued reading through several different books, committing every chakra control exercise, taijutsu stances and shurikenjutsu throwing postures to memory before leaving the library. The clone was left behind to continue reading the books on nature transformation. After exiting the building, Naruto stretched his slightly stiff body. It had been a long time since he had sat down and earnestly studied, but it gave him a sense of nostalgia and accomplishment. However, the entire time he spent reading, Naruto could feel the restless energy inside of him increase the longer he spent studying. He felt like he had to move and get some form of training in before he exploded. Taking a step towards Team 7's training ground, Naruto's stomach started rumbling. Well, make that after I get something to eat. The blonde sheepishly muttered while patting his stomach. Initially, Naruto considered going to Ichiraku to order ramen but was reminded of his almost empty money pouch and settled for some instant ramen at home. After eating, Naruto reached Training Ground 7. The first thing he planned to work on was chakra control because it was the foundation of every ninja skill. If one wanted to efficiently use ninjutsu, genjutsu or create fuinjutsu, they needed a certain level of chakra control. Even taijutsu and bukijutsu required the user to continuously mold and send chakra to the muscles and enhance them. However, before performing a technique, chakra must first be molded by combining the two types of stamina, physical energy and mental energy. You need a high enough chakra control if you want to mold the correct amount of chakra. Otherwise, you will pull too much or too little chakra. Chakra control is also utilized when hand signs are used to initiate a technique. Naruto knew the reason why his clone technique didn't work was because he molded too much chakra but then wasted too much when performing the clone technique. This resulted in not enough chakra being used for the clone technique. The leaf sticking exercise was a mandatory class at the academy. Despite taking far longer than others of his age, he had finally managed to get it to stick to his forehead for the 5 seconds required to pass the class. This should be relatively easy. Naruto placed the leaf on his forehead before molding and sending a stream of chakra, expecting the leaf to stick like he had managed to do so before. Yet as if to crush any expectation he had, almost instantly after Naruto sent the chakra to his forehead, the leaf was blasted from his body and disintegrated in the air. What? That has got to be a faulty leaf. I have done this before. Naruto stared in disbelief at the dust carried away by the wind. Picking up another leaf, he molded and channeled chakra again, causing the leaf to soon follow its comrade's demise. At that point, Naruto realized it wasn't a fluke. The lack of practicing chakra control over the past 2 years had resulted in him losing the minute control of his chakra that he once had. In fact, Naruto considered it a miracle that he could open the first gate without destroying his brain after knowing that his chakra control was completely shot. Poof! Naruto conjured 5 clones into existence. It wasn't too high a number, and they were only practicing the leaf sticking exercise. He figured that he would be able to handle the mental strain from them dispelling. Everyone picked up some leaves that were lying on the ground, which were unaware of the fate that they would suffer, and attempted to stick them to their foreheads using chakra. With each leaf's demise, the amount of chakra that Naruto was molding and utilizing slowly became less and less. Eventually, the leaf started to blast off his forehead but did not disintegrate in the air. It wasn't much progress, but Naruto was happy that it was progress nonetheless. An hour later, Naruto dispelled the clones one by one in an attempt to keep himself from overloading with information. To his surprise, he didn't feel much discomfort. Even though he had dispelled thousands at one point after fighting Mizuki, they were only in existence for mere seconds to minutes before being dispelled. In addition, the clones had hardly transmitted any information back, whether it was because of the adrenaline from the fight or the lack of good memory, Naruto didn't know. Yet these clones had been focused for a little over an hour on an exercise that he found relatively tricky, but he didn't feel any discomfort from obtaining what was essentially 5 hours of memories. Naruto picked up a leaf, sticking it to his forehead to check if the feedback from his clones increased his chakra control. True to his expectations, the leaf adhered to his head for almost a second before lightly being blasted off. It seems that I am correct in thinking that shadow clones can increase chakra control. Because I can handle the strain, maybe I should increase the number of clones. Nothing too drastic, Maybe about 50 clones. Naruto muttered to himself. After integrating the clones' experiences into his memory, Naruto realized that summoning 5 shadow clones didn't mean he would progress 5 times faster. However, it was still much faster than exercising alone. As a result, 50 clones wouldn't increase his chakra control 50 times, but it would be a hell of a lot faster than 5 clones. Making another clone sign, Naruto willed 50 clones into existence. Although a quick headcount made him realize that only 43 clones were actually present. Stupid chakra control underpowering my techniques, not making the number of clones I want. Naruto grumbled and summoned another 7 clones to make a perfect 50. The clones silently sat down, picked up a nearby leaf and placed it on their foreheads. Now that he had confirmed that chakra control exercises performed by the clones increased his control, Naruto planned to leave them and focus on something his clones couldn't help him with. Physical exercise. I'll leave you guys alone and go train, hehe. Naruto chuckled at his own pun before walking away, receiving a mixture of suppressed laughter, glares, sighs of exasperation and looks of confusion from his clones. Standing in a large open clearing, Naruto recalled everything he knew about exercise, which wasn't much. He knew the basics, such as squats, lunges, planks, pull-ups, sit-ups and running, but hoped that the library would have a book on the subject that he could read when he visited next. While Naruto didn't exactly have a goal in mind when performing these exercises, he figured he would do each one until he couldn't anymore. It was reckless, but he never had any problems following this routine at the academy. So Naruto threw caution to the wind and pushed himself until he couldn't move anymore. It was his dream to become the strongest ninja ever to exist, and Naruto knew that he wouldn't be able to do that if he didn't push himself harder than others. He had overheard one of his upperclassmen at the academy say it while hyping himself up before training. If you believe in your dreams, you can accomplish them just by working hard. Although it was a strange ideology, it appealed to Naruto. It didn't matter if he had talent or not, if he progressed fast or not. All that mattered was if he had enough perseverance and determination to reach his goal. At the same time, if you failed to achieve your dreams, you couldn't blame anything except your lack of hard work. Naruto didn't know what happened to that upperclassman, but he knew that the boy graduated, becoming a genin approximately a year ago. While thinking about these random thoughts, Naruto pushed himself beyond every limit his body had until he couldn't move anymore. At that point, he laid on the slightly damp grass and stared at the clouds while he waited to recover some level of movement. Suddenly, his eyes went blank as he was hit with experiences of reading multiple books and scrolls on the types, details and exercises of nature transformation. To put it simply, there are 5 basic nature transformations that correspond to the elements: wind, lightning, earth, water and fire. Wind and fire techniques are primarily wide-area offensive attacks. Water techniques are effective at capturing the enemy. Earth techniques are usually defensive or supplementary, with very few useful offensive techniques. Finally, lightning techniques involved single-target attacks with high speed and lethality. Every person's chakra has an affinity toward one or more of the 5 basic nature transformations. This affinity is usually caused by genetics and can be determined by a special type of paper called chakra induction paper. Chakra induction paper. That's going to take another load of Ryo out of Gamma-chan. Naruto wept. Gamma-chan was going to be starved for a while. However, even though Naruto didn't know his affinity, he wasn't planning on waiting until he saved up enough Ryo to purchase chakra induction paper to find out. Naruto had read that, even if it is more difficult, it is still possible for shinobi to train in natures that don't match their affinity. Hence, even if he didn't know what affinity he had, he should pick 1 or 2 natures to focus on. After thinking about the advantages and disadvantages of the different elemental natures, Naruto decided to focus on earth and lightning. Earth because, in his opinion, it was the most versatile element. It was primarily used in defensive techniques but also had several stealth and reconnaissance applications. Meanwhile, lightning was undoubtedly the most suitable offensive element for him, with its quick attacks and lethal nature. After thoroughly analyzing the clone's memories and determining the natures he wanted to focus on, Naruto stood up and headed back to the group of practicing clones. He started to dispel the clones in groups of 5s every couple of seconds. After dispelling the 50 clones, Naruto felt a slight strain in his mind due to the constant influx of memories. I feel like 50 is the limit, he thought as he massaged his temples to numb the pain a little. Naruto picked up a leaf, placing it on his forehead. After almost a minute, he could finally no longer sustain a stable stream of chakra to his forehead before the leaf finally slipped down onto his face. Even though the leaf eventually fell, the boy could be seen smiling. In less than a day, he had surpassed his old chakra control. After rejoicing about his progress, Naruto created a new batch of 50 clones, directing 25 to perform the leaf-sticking exercise and the other 25 to start the first stage of Earth-Nature transformation exercises. The first stage involved molding and converting his chakra into Earth-Natured chakra and channeling it into the leaf. If he converted his chakra correctly, the leaf would crumble into dirt. I should make my chakra feel like it is solid and immovable, just like a rock, Naruto thought to himself, picking up a new leaf. However, even after understanding what his chakra should feel like, he struggled with the concept of converting his chakra into Earth chakra. The book didn't explain in detail the concepts of transforming his chakra into any nature, leaving Naruto with many questions. How does one change the properties of their chakra? Is it based on the user's imagination and intent for the chakra? Or is a manipulation of chakra similar to chakra control? Naruto figured that as soon as he discovered some inkling of how to convert his chakra, his clones could continue to make progress through trial and error. Naruto picked up a small pebble instead of a leaf without paying attention and instinctively channeled chakra into it. Before he could realize his mistake, Naruto lost himself in the feeling of the rock, his chakra spreading into the ground below him. It felt stable, all-encompassing, which made sense as the earth was practically boundless, completely surrounding him. Naruto compared the feeling he received to his chakra when he tried to change its nature. It was worlds apart. When trying to convert his chakra, all he did was imagine it being hard and stuff. Yet the chakra had nowhere near the solid and stable feeling he felt in the natural earth around him. It felt too rigid. After opening his eyes, Naruto picked up the leaf once more and recalled the feeling of the earth around him. He felt his chakra slowly change, feeling more and more solid before infusing it into the leaf. Naruto closely inspected the leaf after several seconds of infusing chakra. At the very tip, which one could barely see unless they studied it closely, he could see a slight shade of brown, causing him to smile widely. Hey guys, look, Naruto grinned, holding out the leaf in pride to his nature transformation clones. The clones looked up from their respective leaves and gathered around Naruto, looking like curious children. Naruto passed the leaf around, getting various reactions from the group. What? I don't see anything. No, wait, look at the very tip. Ooh, boss, you're awesome. Naruto grinned sheepishly at their praise, scratching the back of his head in embarrassment. It was very easy for him to forget that they were him, but he still enjoyed their compliments nonetheless. I will dispel you all, and we can all start from this point. Naruto dispelled the clones. Even though the original clones didn't make any part of the leaf change into dirt, they had all increased their proficiency in converting their chakra while sending it into the leaf. The new 25 Narutos appeared, picked up some more leaves and continued training. By this point, Naruto realized that he had finally recovered from the intense physical training. He had always recovered faster than others of his age. Whether he suffered any injuries or just exhaustion, it would vanish in less than an hour of resting. Now that he was fully restored, Naruto dropped the leaf he held. He left the clones to train their respective exercises and started more physical training. He could see the visible progress he made when he managed to perform 1 or 2 more push-ups than he did a little over an hour ago, and it only motivated him to work harder. The next day, Naruto woke up early and sent a clone to the library. The clone had orders to create another 4 shadow clones, which were to immediately transform themselves and start reading books on mathematics, taijutsu and various medical texts. Naruto wanted to figure out the reasons why his experience with the 8 inner gates technique was different from the mainstream version that is widely accepted by the world. For this, he needed to have in-depth knowledge of the human body, especially Tenketsu and the chakra pathway system. The blonde then set off to the meeting spot, under a tree at Training Ground 7. Although he wanted to make several clones to start working on chakra control and nature transformations, Naruto didn't know what Kakashi was planning to do, although he had some ideas. Speaking of Kakashi, Naruto still didn't know how to face the Jonin or his team, as he was still angry at them for abandoning him tied to the post, with them not even considering checking to see if he was there hours later. Shaking away any negative thoughts, Naruto decided that he wouldn't be so quick to judge his team in a bad light. Maybe they had made an honest mistake of thinking that one of the others would come back to check on him. He had made several mistakes throughout his life and knew that nobody was perfect. So he wouldn't hold it against them forever. Naruto knew that in spite of all of the changes that had happened over the past day, he still desired to have friends and family. Even if the third Hokage had often lied to him, he still clung to the idea that his first team would be his comrades, friends and family. As a result, he decided that he would make efforts to try to reach out to his team. However, friendship requires efforts from both sides. If they rejected him, he would treat them amiably since they were on the same team, but he wouldn't go out of his way to help them with their troubles. By the time he came out of his thoughts, Naruto had already arrived at the training grounds 10 minutes before the scheduled meetup. Neither Sakura nor Sasuke were there, so he rested his back against a nearby tree and closed his eyes. Yet after waiting for another 5 minutes without any sign of his teammates or teacher, the restless energy inside Naruto practically demanded that he do something to stave off his boredom. So the boy picked up a nearby leaf, attempting to channel Earth Chakra once more. The hours that his clones had spent working on his Earth nature had resulted in significant progress, with the tip of the leaf crumbling to dirt when chakra was applied. Of course, this was nowhere near mastery, but Naruto was sure that he would be able to master the first stage of Earth nature transformation within a month of training. He planned to start his lightning nature transformation when he had enough Ryo to purchase a steady supply of light bulbs. Naruto was brought out of his concentration when he heard familiar voices in the distance. Looking up from the leaf, he could see Sasuke and Sakura walking toward him. The pink-haired girl was constantly talking about one topic or another. While Sasuke seemed to tune out everything she was saying, which didn't seem to deter the pinkette at all. "Good morning Sasuke, Sakura." HN. Sasuke gave a slight nod of acknowledgement before returning to his thoughts. "Naruto, you are earlier than I thought you would be." Sakura gave a reluctant smile to the blonde-haired boy. "I wanted to spend more time with Sasuke-kun, god damn it." Naruto picked up on their reluctance to talk to him and remained silent. If the other two noticed his characteristic change in loudness, they didn't care to make a comment on it. As a result, for the next 3 hours, Naruto was focused on his Earth nature transformation, occasionally picking up a new leaf when the current one was too damaged. Sasuke was deep within his thoughts while ignoring Sakura, who was constantly talking about things that, in all honesty, he didn't care about at all. Precisely 3 hours from the promised meeting time, a puff of smoke appeared in front of the trio, startling them. "Yo!" Kakashi gave a lazy wave. "You're late." Sakura screamed at Kakashi, who nonchalantly picked at his ear. Meanwhile, Sasuke just glared in annoyance. This was the 3rd time that Kakashi had been late to their meetings, and he was the one who set the time and place. Unbeknownst to the three, Kakashi was inwardly surprised at only hearing Sakura scream at him. He had spent time reading the academy records of the three genin, and he expected Naruto to also yell at him for being late. Looking at the boy in question, Kakashi was even more confused at the look of resentment that Naruto gave him before the boy turned his head away in silence. However, the team leader didn't voice his questions. Maybe the boy was also tired and annoyed at waiting for him to come. Little did his genin know that him being late would be a common occurrence for the group. How do I put this? A ninja donkey entered my apartment last night and ate today's plans, so I had to stay up late redoing them. Kakashi scratched his head in embarrassment while inwardly praising himself. They've got to believe this, right? And where are these new plans you are talking about? Sakura asked, curious to find out if this stupid-sounding story was true. Without missing a beat, Kakashi ignored her question and turned around while walking toward the main street of Konoha. Well then, let's go get a mission, shall we? The genin just stared in shock at his blatant attempt to ignore the question but followed him regardless. While walking behind the group, Naruto couldn't help but wonder what was the point in meeting at Training Ground 7 if they were just going to walk back towards Konoha when everyone arrived. Meanwhile, Kakashi was looking forward to seeing the looks on his genin's face when they learned what missions they would be receiving. He was confident that the types of missions in Konoha weren't explained until reaching genin. Opening the door to the Hokage's office, the group were greeted with the sight of the third Hokage sitting at his desk with Iruka as his assistant by his side. Naruto also saw that towards the left, there were three men in charge of accepting and processing mission reports. Hokage-sama, we have come for our first D-rank mission. Kakashi requested. His lazy appearance faded slightly as he showed respect for his leader. The Hokage glanced through the list of D-rank missions, picking one at random. Well, let's start with something more simple. Painting a fence for Wadafumi-san. As if he had done it several times before, Iruka swiftly sorted through a stack of papers, taking a sheet from near the middle. He then filled out the team taking the mission and the expected payment before handing it to Kakashi. Kakashi didn't even look at the form, instantly putting it in his pocket. Let's go, team. The three genin followed him, and Kakashi smiled beneath his mask as he felt the glares that both Sakura and Sasuke were giving him. Naruto was still staring down at his feet, but he was happy enough to annoy two out of the three genin. After the team exited, Iruka made his first comment. I didn't expect Naruto to not make a complaint, that was strange. Having taken over the majority of the boys' classes this past year, he had become accustomed to Naruto's loud outbursts to the point he was expecting it. The Hokage nodded his head in thought. Naruto seemed a little off today. Even in a formal setting like this, he would usually greet him with all the usual disrespect that he was used to receiving from the boy. However, today he was uncharacteristically silent. He probably knew about what D-rank missions entail a long time ago, Iruka-kun. Naruto-kun has been in the office many times when missions were handed out to genin teams and even some newly promoted chunin. Hiruzen explained, receiving an understanding nod from his assistant. In fact, what the Hokage said was close to the truth. Naruto had been in the office many times when missions were being handed out, even before entering the academy. However, if not for his sudden clarity of memories, he would have forgotten all about the differences between D, C and B rank missions. Naruto stood with his team as they knocked upon a door near the village center. Shortly after, an old woman with graying hair opened the door with a bewildered look. Hello, we are here for the mission. Kakashi gave an eye smile to the old woman who was wondering what they wanted. Oh, curse my deteriorating memory, you guys are here for the fence painting. Let me just bring you all inside. The old woman scanned the team, her gaze freezing on Naruto for a moment before dismissing him like he wasn't there. An action that went unknown to half the team. Kakashi looked down at his student with slight concern. only to see that the boy seemed unfazed. Either Naruto is used to such treatment, or he didn't see it. The Jonin furrowed his brow. Which one was it? The old woman led the team to the backyard. It had 3 fences roughly 8 feet tall, with white paint so old that it was starting to flake off. Please paint all the walls with the white paint provided. I will bring out some juice later. Wait, what about the top of the fences? We can't reach them, Sakura asked, hoping for some sort of box to stand on. Or maybe Sasuke-kun could let us hop onto his shoulders. She inwardly exclaimed, sighing as her impulsiveness stopped her from getting closer to Sasuke. There are some stepladders in the house that were loaned to me. Unfortunately, there are only 2 available. So one of you will have to go without. The old woman handed the step ladders to Sasuke and Sakura before walking to the house to rest. Well then, guys, I will take this wall. Naruto picked up a bucket of paint and a wooden brush and headed to his self-appointed fence. Sasuke-kun, how about we share the same wall? Sakura asked hopefully. Now that Naruto had finally taken the hint and moved to the opposite side of the garden, maybe they could have some alone time. I think it would be better if we each took a wall. As soon as the pink-haired girl finished, she was shut down by Sasuke, who glared at the wall. Am I seriously going to waste my time doing this? Slightly depressed at being shot down without a second thought, Sakura sighed and went to the last unoccupied wall before freezing. Kakashi-sensei, what are you going to be doing? Oh, don't mind me, Sakura. I am supervising you to make sure you do the job right. Kakashi gave a lazy wave before rummaging through his pockets and pulling out the orange book he was reading in the Genin exam. Sakura had a growing tick mark at the blatant laziness of her Jonin-sensei but took her frustrations out on the floor. Hopefully, I don't get paint on this dress. It would be a nightmare to remove. The pinkett grumbled. Yeah, and if we do, let's clobber our sensei, Shanaru. Kakashi looked toward his blonde student. The boy was the first to start painting and the Jonin could see that he had experience in doing so. So by this point, Naruto was close to reaching the top of the first plank. Kakashi had expected him to ask either Sakura or Sasuke for a step ladder but was shocked by Naruto simply making a hand sign and conjuring a shadow clone. The existence of the clone pulled Sasuke from his thoughts and Sakura from her conversation with inner Sakura, both looking curious as to why Naruto was summoning one of his solid clones. The team then saw the clone hop onto the shoulders of its creator, with Naruto picking up the paint can, allowing the clone to dip his brush in the bucket. After the clone had finished painting the top of the first plank of wood, Naruto crouched down and started from the bottom of the second plank, slowly making his way to the top. Naruto thought about making more clones to help with the painting, but after thinking about it, he decided not to. There were only 3 buckets of paint in total, so multiple clones would have to share a single bucket, which would cause a lot more trouble than it solved. Sasuke and Sakura turned back to their respective fences, glad that they didn't have to share a stepladder. Not only would it get annoying quick to constantly have to ask to borrow the ladder, but they would have to wait, making the mission take even longer than it should do. About 2 hours later, the sun had reached its peak and was blasting everyone in Konoha with heat. Sakura was sweating from the constant exposure to the sun while being worried that she would tan because she had heard in the academy that Sasuke didn't like tanned girls. Sasuke wiped the sheen of sweat that had gathered on his forehead, inwardly cursing that he had to continue painting even in this heat. Meanwhile, Naruto felt much less hot. The bright orange jacket and trousers he wore acted as a reflective screen, dissipating some of the heat, making it much more bearable. You guys sure are working hard. I made a good decision to hire some ninja to get the job done. The old woman walked out of the house, holding a tray with 3 glasses of juice. She smiled at the progress. The fences almost were covered in their first coating. I need to submit another mission for the final coating. The old woman handed a glass of juice to Kakashi, Sasuke and Sakura before heading back in. Sakura and Sasuke were far enough from Naruto that they couldn't see the blatant mistreatment that the boy suffered, but Kakashi was in clear view of everything. However, what could he do about it? Threaten the woman that he would report her to the Hokage for playing favorites. It's not like he had any evidence. In the end, Kakashi made a mental note to talk to Naruto and the Hokage if the boy showed any sign of discomfort from the treatment he was receiving. Kakashi lazily walked over to Naruto. The sudden shade from his shadow caused the boy to look up from the fence he was painting. He held out the glass of cold juice, prompting the boy to give a strange look at his sudden gesture. The silver-haired Jonin looked confused. He didn't remember doing anything to earn Naruto's ire. Maybe the boy was far more aware of the differences in treatment that he received from the old woman than he thought. Kakashi almost thought what he saw was a mistake as Naruto's facial expressions reverted to normal as the boy gently took the juice out of his hand before downing it. "Thank you, Kakashi-sensei." Naruto politely thanked the Jonin, not knowing what to do with the sudden thoughtfulness shown. "No problem, Naruto." Kakashi took the empty glass and walked back to his sport in the shade, unsealing a water bottle from his pouch and taking a sip. Less than 30 minutes later, Naruto had finished painting his side of the fence. He looked around to see that Sasuke was almost done himself, while Sakura was lagging behind. Instead of asking Kakashi what he was required to do next, Naruto only did the obvious. Help his teammates. The blonde took his paint bucket and started painting the opposite end of Sakura's fence. Kakashi saw this and nodded his head with a hidden smile under his mask. He was glad to see that Naruto had really taken the teamwork aspect to heart. Sakura also noticed this. Instinctively, she wanted to get angry at Naruto, who she presumed to be trying to win her favor. Yet knowing that she would be the one to hold everyone up under the sweltering heat resulted in her swallowing her insult. It didn't take long for the trio to finish the mission, with Sasuke taking the initiative to help Sakura and Naruto after he finished his wall. After completion, the old woman signed the form while thanking Sakura, Sasuke and Kakashi. By this point, Sakura and Sasuke had noticed that the woman had left out Naruto's name when thanking them, to which the Pinkett pulled up after they left. "So, Naruto, what did you do to earn the old woman's anger?" Sakura questioned, unintentionally pulling up a topic that Naruto had hoped they would avoid. However, looking at his team, he could see that Sasuke was also interested in what he had to say despite not showing it. While Kakashi's shoulders were tensed, ready to explain in case Naruto messed up. "Ahaha, you know me, Sakura, always pranking everyone." Naruto scratched the back of his head with a forced grin that seemed to fool everyone except Kakashi. Sasuke scoffed, losing interest in whatever they were talking about, while Kakashi's shoulders relaxed. "So he was aware. I knew it. There's no way that the nice old woman would hate you for no reason. Of course, it's your fault." Sakura pointed at Naruto dramatically, causing the blonde to wince. The villagers' treatment of him due to the Kyuubi was still an open wound for him. He figured it would take a while until he could truly move past the issue. "That's enough, Sakura. Let's hand in the mission." Kakashi interrupted before Sakura could continue her rant, receiving a thankful look from Naruto. Team 7 were once again in the Hokage's office, ready to hand in their completed mission. "Hokage-sama, Team 7 have completed their mission." Kakashi handed the completed form and money to the workers on the left, who signed the mission off as complete. The mission workers then handed the money back to the Jonin, who distributed it equally across the team. Naruto fed Gama-chan with the cash while thinking, 5,000 ryo divided by 4 is 1250 each. That's barely enough for a week of ramen. "We will see you tomorrow then, Hokage-sama." Kakashi led the team out of the building. He then looked towards his squad, gauging their expressions and fatigue. Sasuke was slightly tired, but he tried not to show it. Sakura was extremely tired. Her emotions were also agitated from the heat. On the other hand, Naruto looked nonchalant, Truly a stamina monster. Kakashi thought. I will see you at the same time, the same place tomorrow. Kakashi waved goodbye before poofing into smoke. Naruto felt a little underwhelmed. If they were only going to do D-rank missions, he would have liked it if they could do more assignments. What about training? Is he supposed to teach us, or are we expected to learn everything ourselves? Naruto decided that if Kakashi was going to be 3 hours late again tomorrow and do one mission with the team before leaving, he would get some physical and clone training in. He might even ask if he could do several more D-rank tasks using shadow clones to earn more money to buy jutsu from the library. Sasuke-kun, would you like to go to a restaurant together? Sakura asked excitedly. She was looking forward to spending the ryo that she had just earned. It was the first bundle of money that she received that wasn't pocket money or birthday money. Sasuke just shook his head and walked away. Today was a waste of time, he thought to himself. Sakura trailed after Sasuke, attempting to change his mind with both of them, leaving Naruto alone without a goodbye. The boy in question looked hurt for a moment before shrugging it off and walking towards the village center. After transforming himself into a random man, Naruto stopped by a ninja store to buy some special light bulbs used by ninjas for lightning nature transformation exercises. He then proceeded to head to the training grounds to make up for lost training time.